Chapter 18. It took me several days to become reconciled to the idea of leaving Gavura, Mitka, and all my other friends in the regiment. But Gavura was very firm in explaining that the war was ending, that my country had been fully liberated from the Germans, and that according to regulations, lost children had to be delivered to special centers where they would keep until it was determined if their parents were still alive. I looked at his face while he was telling me all these things, and held back my tears. Gavura also felt uneasy. I knew that he and Mitka had discussed my future, and if there had been any other solution, they would have found it. Gavura promised that if no relatives claimed me within the 3 months after the end of the war, he would take care of me himself, and would send me to school, where they would teach me to speak again. In the meantime, he urged me to be brave and remember everything I had learned from him, and to read Pravda, the Soviet newspaper, every day. I was given a bag full of gifts from the soldiers, and books from Gavura and Mitka. I put on Soviet Army uniform, which was made especially for me by the regimental tailor. In a pocket I found a small wooden pistol with a picture of Stalin on it on one side and Lenin on the other. The moment of parting had come. I was going away with Sergeant Yuri, who had some military business in the town, where there was a center for lost children. This industrial city, the country's largest, was where I had lived before the war. Gavura made certain that I had all my things and that my personal dossier was in good order. He had assembled it in all the information I had given him concerning my name, previous places of residence, and the details I remembered about my parents, my hometown, our relatives and friends. The driver started the engine. Mitka patted me on the shoulder and urged me to uphold the honor of the Red Army. Gavura hugged me warmly, and the others shook hands with me in turn, as though I were a grown-up. I wanted to cry, but I kept my face straight and laced tight like a soldier's boot. We started for the station. The train was packed with soldiers and civilians. It stopped often at broken-down signals, went on and stopped again between stations. We passed bombed-out towns, deserted villages, abandoned cars, tanks, guns, airplanes with their wings and their tails surface cut away. Here and there ragged people ran along the tracks begging for cigarettes and food, while half-naked children stared open-mouthed at the train. It took us 2 days to reach our destination. All the tracks were being used by military transports, Red Cross carriages, and open cars loaded with army equipment. On the platform, crowds of Soviet soldiers and ex-prisoners in the variety of uniforms jostled along with limping invalids, shabby civilians, and blind people who tapped the flagstones with their canes. Here and there, nurses directed emaciated people in striped clothes. The soldiers looked at them in sudden silence. Those were the people saved from the furnaces, who were returning to life from the concentration camps. I clutched Yuri's hand, and looked at the gray faces of these people, with their feverishly burning eyes, shining like pieces of broken glass in the ashes of a dying fire. Nearby, a locomotive pushed a gleaming rail car to the center of the station. A foreign military delegation emerged in colorful uniforms and medals. An honor guard quickly formed, and the military band struck up the anthem. Smartly uniformed officers and the men in striped concentration camp clothes passed without a word, within a few feet of each other on the narrow platform. New flags were flying over the main station building, and loudspeakers blared music interrupted from time to time by hoarse speeches and greetings. Yuri looked at his watch. We made our way to the exit. One of the military drivers agreed to take us to the orphans' home. The streets of the city were full of convoys and soldiers. The sidewalks swarmed with people. The orphanage occupied several old houses on a side street. Innumerable children peered from the windows. We spent an hour in the lobby. Yuri read a newspaper, and I feigned indifference. Finally, the woman principal came over and greeted us, taking the folder with my documents from Yuri. She signed some papers, gave them to Yuri, and placed her hand on my shoulder. I firmly shook it off. The epitaphs of a uniform were not meant for a woman's hands. The moment of parting arrived. Yuri pretended to be cheerful. He joked, straightened the forage cap on my head, and tightened the string round the books with Mitka and Gavro's inscriptions, which I carried under my arm. We hugged each other like two men. The principal stood by. I clutched the red star attached to my left breast pocket. A gift from Gavora. It had Lenin's profile on it. I now believed that this star, leading millions of workers throughout the world to the goal, could also bring me good luck. I followed the principal. Walking along crowded corridors, we passed the open doors of a classroom, in which lessons were in progress. Here and there children were scuffling and shouting. Some boys, seeing my uniform, pointed their fingers at me and laughed. I turned away. Someone threw an apple core. I ducked it and it hit the principal. I had no peace for the first few days. The principal wanted me to give up my uniform and wear ordinary civilian clothes sent to the children by the International Red Cross. I nearly hit a nurse on the head when she tried to take away the uniform. I slept with my tunic and trousers folded under my mattress for safekeeping. After a while my long, unwashed uniform began to smell, but I still refused to part with it even for a day. The principal, annoyed by this insubordination, called two nurses and had them take it away by force. A jubilant crowd of boys surrounded the three of us. I broke from the clumsy woman and ran into the street. There I accosted four quietly strolling Soviet soldiers. I signaled with my hand that I was a mute. They gave me a piece of paper in which I wrote that I was the son of a Soviet officer who was in the front and that I was waiting for my father at the orphanage. Then I wrote in careful language that the principal was the daughter of a landlord, that she hated the Red Army, and that she, together with the nurses exploited by her, beat me daily because of my uniform. As I expected, my message aroused the young soldiers. They followed me inside, and while one of them systematically smashed the flower pots of the principal's carpeted office, the other chased the nurses, slapping them, pinching their bottoms. The frightened women yelled and screamed. After that, the staff let me alone. Even the teachers ignored my refusal to learn reading and writing in my mother tongue. I wrote in chalk on the blackboard. There, my language was Russian, the speech of the land where there was no exploitation of the one by the many, where teachers did not persecute their pupils. A large calendar hung over my bed. I crossed off every day with a red pencil. I did not know how many more days were left at the end of the war, still being waged in Germany, but I was confident that the Red Army was doing its best to bring the end near. Every day I sneaked out of the orphanage and bought a copy of Pravda with the money Gavora had given me. I read hastily all the news about the latest victories, and I looked carefully at the new pictures of Stalin. I felt reassured. Stalin looked fit and youthful. Everything was going well. The war would end soon. One day I was summoned for a medical examination. I refused to leave my uniform outside the office, and I was examined carrying it under my arm. After the examination, I was interviewed by some sort of social commission. One of the members, an older man, read all my papers carefully. He approached me in a friendly manner. He mentioned my name and asked me whether I had any idea where my parents were planning to go when they had left me. I pretended not to understand. Someone translated the question into Russian, adding that he seemed to think that he had known my parents before the war. I wrote nonchalantly on a slate that my parents were dead, killed by a bomb. The members of the commission gave me a suspicious look. I saluted stiffly and walked out of the room. The inquisitive man had upset me. There was 500 of us at the orphanage. We were divided into groups and attended lessons in small, dingy classrooms. Many of the boys and girls were crippled and acted very strangely. The classrooms were crowded. We were short of desks and blackboards. I was sitting next to a boy about my age who kept muttering incessantly, "Where's my daddy? Where's my daddy?" He looked around as if expecting his daddy to emerge from under a desk and pat him on his sweaty forehead. Directly behind us was a girl who had lost all her fingers in an explosion. She stared at the fingers of other children, which were as lively as worms. Noticing her glance, they would quickly hide their hands as if afraid of her eyes. Farther away, there was a boy with part of his jaw and arm missing. He had to be fed by others. The odor of the festering wound emanated from him. There was also several partly paralyzed children. We all looked at one another with loathing and fear. One never knew what one could catch from a neighbor, or what he might do. Many of the boys in the class were older and stronger than I. They knew that I could not speak, and consequently believed that I was a moron. They called me names, and sometimes beat me up. In the morning, when I came to the classroom after the sleepless nights in the crowded dormitory, I felt trapped, fearful, and apprehensive. The anticipation of disaster increased. I was as taut as an elastic in a slingshot, and the slightest incident would throw me off balance. I was afraid not so much of being attacked by other boys, as of seriously injuring someone in self-defense. As they often told us in the orphanage, that would mean jail, and the end of my hopes of returning to Gavlorla. I could not control my movements in a scuffle. My hand acquired a life of their own and could not be torn away from an opponent. Besides, for a long time after a fight I could not calm down, pondering what had happened and getting excited again. I was also unable to run away. When I saw a group of boys coming towards me, I immediately stopped. I tried to convince myself that I was avoiding being hit from behind, and that I could better gauge the strength of intentions of the enemy. But the truth was that I could not even run away when I wanted to. My legs became strangely heavy, with the weight distributed in an odd manner. My thighs and calves grew leaden, but my knees were light and sagged like soft pillows. The memory of all my successive escapes did not help me much. Some mysterious mechanism bound me to the ground. I would stop and wait for my assailants. All the time I thought of Mitka's teachings. A man should never let himself be mistreated, for he would then lose his self-respect, and his life would become meaningless. What would preserve his self-respect and determine his worth was his ability to take revenge on those who wronged him. A person should take revenge for every wrong or humiliation. There were far too many injustices in this world to have them all weighed and judged. A man should consider every wrong he had suffered and decide on the appropriate revenge. Only the conviction that one was as strong as the enemy, and that one could pay him back double, enabled people to survive, Mitka said. A man should take revenge according to his own nature, and the means of his disposal. It was quite simple. If someone were rude to you and hurt you like a whiplash, you should punish them as though you had been lashed with a whip. If someone slapped you and it felt like 1,000 blows, take revenge for 1,000 blows. The revenge should be proportionate to the pain, bitterness, and humiliation felt as a result of the opponent's action. A slap in the face might not be too painful for one man. For another, it might cause him to relive a persecution he endured through hundreds of days of beatings. The first man could forget about it in an hour. The second man might be tormented for weeks by nightmarish recollections.